My father refused to make food for me, so I learned to fend for myself. Now, his new wife expects me to take care of her kids. The whole situation of preparing my own meals began when I was around 12 years old. My mom was seriously ill with cancer, and obviously she couldn't manage small tasks like making lunches. At the time, it wasn't a big deal. I was old enough to understand how to make a sandwich and pack a few snacks, so I just started doing it myself. It felt like the responsible thing to do. After she passed away, nothing really changed. My dad wasn't around much during the day, and he never bothered making lunch for me. In fact, I doubt he even knew what I ate half the time. He just told me, "You're old enough to handle it," and left it at that. So, I kept making my own meals, never giving it much thought. It became a habit: grab a few things from the fridge, throw them in a bag, and head out. No big deal, right? Fast forward a few years, and now I'm 16. Still making my own lunch, still taking care of myself. But things are different now. You see, my dad got remarried a couple of years ago to a woman named Sarah. She has 3 kids from her previous marriage, twin boys who are about 6, and an 11-year-old daughter. Initially, I didn't pay much attention to them moving in. Sure, it was strange having more people around, but it didn't bother me too much. They weren't my concern. I had my own room, my own space, and my own routine. But about a year ago, Sarah got this idea that since I was already preparing my own meals, I should be making lunch for her kids as well. She thought it would be helpful and make things easier for her, so she wouldn't have to do it herself. I remember the first time she brought it up, I thought she was joking. I mean, why would I make lunch for them? I barely knew them, and they weren't my responsibility. But she wasn't joking, she genuinely expected me to do it. I told her no without hesitation. I didn't feel bad about it either. I was already making my own food because my dad couldn't be bothered, so why should I take on more work? Plus, I had school and a part-time job to balance. I simply didn't have the time to be packing lunches for a bunch of kids who weren't my concern. To me, it wasn't a big deal. They were her children, not mine. Apparently, Sarah didn't see it that way. She was shocked when I refused, like I had insulted her or something. She went on about how it was crazy that I didn't want to help my siblings, that's what she called them, but I don't see them that way. I barely know them, and they certainly don't feel like siblings to me. After that argument, I assumed she'd drop it, realizing that her kids were her responsibility, not mine. But I was wrong. She went straight to my dad, probably expecting him to back her up. And of course, my dad, who hates confrontation, half-heartedly agreed with her. He said something like, "It wouldn't hurt to help out a little. You know you're part of the family now." I could feel myself getting angry. Since when was I considered part of this new family? No one ever asked how I felt about having 3 strangers move into my house. But whatever, I stood my ground and said no. I wasn't going to budge on this. Sarah was clearly upset, but I didn't care. I knew that if I gave in once, I'd end up making lunches forever. After that, things got awkward. Every time Sarah saw me in the kitchen preparing my lunch, she'd give me this look, like she was silently judging me for not helping. It wasn't that I was heartless. If it were an emergency, of course I'd step in. But this was just her trying to avoid her duties as a mom, and I wasn't about to take that on. Then she started with the guilt trips. She'd say things like, "It must be nice to only worry about yourself," or, "It's so selfish not to help your family." She even dragged her kids into it. One morning, the twins came up to me and asked, "Why don't you make our lunch?" "Mommy says you're good at it." That made me so mad. How could she use her kids to guilt me? I wasn't falling for it, though. I told them, "Ask your mom, she's the one in charge, not me." That didn't go over well. After that, Sarah became even more passive-aggressive. If I was in the kitchen, she'd make a huge mess and leave it for me to clean up, or leave the fridge open so things would spoil faster. It was ridiculous, but I ignored her and kept doing my thing. The worst part came when she tried to push more responsibilities onto me. She'd say things like, "I'm so busy, can you watch the twins for a bit?" Or, "I need to run errands, can you help them with their homework?" No, I have my own life. I'm not a built-in babysitter. I've got schoolwork and my own stuff to handle. Why should I take on more? One day, she reached her limit. I was making my lunch when she came into the kitchen and asked, "Why won't you just help with the kids' lunches?" "It's not that big of a deal." I told her again, "It's not my job, and I don't have time." She looked frustrated and said, "It's just lunch, you're already doing it for yourself." Why not for them? I snapped a little at that point. Because they're your kids, not mine, I said. I'm not their dad, I'm not their mom, and I'm not here to cover for what you're not doing. She looked stunned, like she hadn't expected that. She stood there for a moment, then turned and walked out. I thought that was the end of it, but boy, was I wrong. After that, things didn't calm down. If anything, they escalated. Sarah became even more determined to make me cave. And of course she went back to my dad, but this time it wasn't just a suggestion. She came at him full force, arguing that I needed to help more around the house and do my part for the family. I could hear them arguing from my room. Sarah was leading the conversation, and my dad, as usual, was nodding along passively, avoiding dealing with the issue directly. I could see what was coming even before my dad knocked on my door. He entered, sat on the edge of my bed, and did that thing where he sighs before talking, like he's about to say something serious, but it's never as significant as he makes it seem just annoying. Look. He started, rubbing his hands together. Sarah has a point, you know. It wouldn't hurt for you to help out more around here. I knew exactly where this was going, but wasn't in the mood to make it easy for him. So I asked, help with what he hesitated, which showed me he didn't want this conversation either, but he was already in too deep. Well, with the kids, he said. You know, making their lunches, helping Sarah when she's busy. You're already making your own lunch, right? I stared at him for a moment. Yeah, my lunch for me, not for anyone else. I know, he said, trying to keep things calm before it escalated. But you're part of the family now, and Sarah has a lot on her plate. It wouldn't hurt for you to step up a little. That's when I lost my patience. Dad, I'm already stepping up. I make my own lunch, I work part-time, I handle my own responsibilities. Why do I need to do more? They're not my kids. Sarah married you, not me. His expression changed instantly, from trying to stay calm to looking irritated. This is about being part of the family, not just doing the bare minimum. We're not asking you to raise the kids just to help out. That's what families do. I was getting angrier, but I knew if I didn't keep it in check, things would blow up. You and Sarah had these kids, not me, I said. If you need help, hire a babysitter. I've got my own life, and I'm not here to fill in for what you two aren't doing. He didn't respond for a while, just sat there as if processing what I said. Then, without saying anything, he stood up, gave me that disappointed dad look, and left the room. I knew this wasn't over. Sarah was probably waiting downstairs for a report, and no matter what I said, it wouldn't make her happy. Things got really uncomfortable after that. Every time I entered the kitchen, Sarah would be there, hovering, watching me. She didn't even try to hide her frustration, making snide comments under her breath like, "Must be nice to only worry about yourself," or "Some people just don't understand what family means." I ignored her. I wasn't going to engage with her passive-aggressive nonsense. I knew it would just turn into another argument, and I didn't have the energy for that. Then she pulled a guilt trip one day. I was in the kitchen, packing my lunch for the next day, when she came in with the twins. She said, "Oh boys, don't you wish you had a big brother who cared enough to make you lunch?" I stopped what I was doing and looked directly at her. That's not fair, and you know it. You can't make me responsible for them. She didn't like that. She told the boys to go play and said, "I need to have an adult conversation with your brother." Once they left, she turned to me and said, "It's not just about the lunches. It's about the fact that you don't even want to help. It's selfish." The word selfish set me off. Selfish? I'm the one making my own food and paying for it with my own money. I'm not asking anyone to take care of me. If anyone's being selfish here, it's you for trying to push your responsibilities onto me. She wasn't expecting me to push back that hard. At first, she looked a little shocked but quickly recovered. I work full-time, I'm raising 3 kids, and I'm trying to keep this house running smoothly. The least you could do is step up and be part of the family. I shook my head. Sarah, I'm part of the family, but that doesn't mean I have to take over your job. You and Dad decided to have these kids. You and Dad should be the ones taking care of them. I'm already doing more than enough by looking after myself. She didn't have a response to that, so she just gave me a frustrated look and walked out of the room. I thought that might be the end of it for the day, but of course it wasn't. Later that evening, I overheard Sarah talking to my dad again, really laying it on thick about how I didn't care about the family, how I was only thinking about myself, and how it was making her life so much harder. I knew my dad would come back to talk to me about it, and sure enough, The next day he knocked on my door again. "Listen," he started, "I get it. You don't feel like it's your responsibility to take care of the kids, but we're all living under the same roof. It'd be nice if you could just help out once in a while. It's not a big ask." At this point, I was just exhausted from the whole situation. "Dad, it is a big ask. I'm already doing more than enough around here. If Sarah needs help, she should talk to you, not me. I'm not going to be a stand-in parent." He looked frustrated but didn't press the issue. I think he realized I wasn't going to back down, and maybe he didn't want another argument. From then on, things stayed tense. Every time I went into the kitchen, I could feel Sarah watching me, waiting for me to slip up or finally cave and do what she wanted. But I wasn't going to give in. This wasn't my problem to solve, and the more they tried to force it on me, the more I resisted. After that last talk with my dad, I figured things couldn't get much worse. Sarah was mad, my dad was frustrated, and I was just trying to stay out of the drama. But of course they couldn't let it go. Things took another turn, and this time it wasn't about lunch, it was about dinner. One evening, I was in the kitchen making myself something to eat. By now, I was used to cooking my own meals. Because I didn't want to sit down with Sarah and my dad, things were too tense, and honestly, I preferred to avoid the awkward family dinners. Plus, I'd been paying for my own food with the money I earned from my part-time job, so I didn't want to hear any complaints about how I wasn't contributing to the household. I was cooking something simple: chicken, rice, and veggies, nothing fancy, but enough for me. I was halfway through when Sarah walked in with the kids, clearly expecting dinner to be ready for everyone. When she saw what I was cooking, she turned to me, annoyed, and asked, "Are you not making dinner for everyone like I was supposed to just know that's what she wanted?" I looked at her and said, "No, this is for me. You didn't ask me to make anything for everyone." She stared at me for a moment, clearly unhappy with my answer. "You're cooking for yourself, but you couldn't think to make enough for the kids too," she snapped. "They're hungry." I could feel myself getting frustrated, but I tried to stay calm. "I'm not their parent, Sarah. I'm just making dinner for myself. You or Dad can make something for them. It's not my responsibility." That set her off. She started going on about how selfish I was, how I never thought about anyone else, and how I was tearing the family apart by refusing to help. It was the same argument I had heard before, but this time it was more intense because now she had the kids standing there, staring at me as if I had done something wrong. I just stood there, letting her vent, because what was I supposed to say? I wasn't going to start cooking dinner for everyone just because she was mad. I knew that if I gave in now, it would never stop. Once she finally finished, I calmly said, "Look, if you want me to cook for everyone, you need to ask me in advance. I'm not going to just start making meals for the whole family because you expect it." She wasn't happy with that response. "I shouldn't have to ask," she snapped. "You live here, you should want to help at that point." I was done. I turned back to my food, finished cooking, and sat down at the kitchen table to eat. Sarah stormed out with the kids, muttering under her breath about how impossible I was and how she couldn't believe I didn't care about them. I just ignored it. I was exhausted with the whole situation and wasn't going to let her guilt me into doing something I didn't want to do. But of course, it didn't end there. The next day, Sarah and my dad had another talk with me. This time, they sat me down in the living room like it was some kind of intervention. I already knew what was coming. "We need to talk about how you've been acting," my dad started, looking all serious. I leaned back on the couch, crossing my arms. "What about it?" I asked. Sarah jumped in right away. "You're refusing to help with anything around the house. You won't make lunch for the kids, you won't make dinner, and now you're even buying your own groceries and cooking your own meals like you're not part of the family." "That's because I'm not their parent," I shot back. "I'm not responsible for making sure they eat. That's your job, not mine," my dad sighed, clearly getting frustrated. "We're not saying you're their parent, but we are a family. We all live here, and it wouldn't hurt you to pitch in once in a while." "I do pitch in," I said, my voice rising a little. "I take care of my own stuff. I make my own food, and I pay for it with my own money. I'm not asking you guys for anything, so why do I need to do more?" Sarah cut in again, "Because you're part of this household. It's not about who's asking for what, it's about contributing and being part of the family." I couldn't help but roll my eyes. I am contributing by not relying on you guys for anything. If I wasn't making my own meals, you'd complain about that too. So what's the problem? The problem, apparently, was that they wanted me to help more with the kids. It wasn't enough that I was already making my own meals, they expected me to make theirs too. They wanted me to take on extra tasks, but only the ones they didn't feel like doing themselves. I'm not their babysitter, I said. And I'm not their cook. I've already told you that I'm not going to start making their meals just because you think I should. By this point, my dad was clearly losing patience. We're not asking you to babysit them, but they're part of this family, and so are you. Why is it so hard for you to understand that helping with them isn't a big deal? I shook my head. Because it is a big deal. I'm not going to take over your responsibilities. If you can't handle them, that's on you, not me. The conversation didn't go anywhere after that. My dad and Sarah kept trying to guilt me into helping more, but I wasn't budging. I wasn't going to let them pile more responsibilities onto me when I was already taking care of my own stuff. I knew that if I gave in even a little, it would never stop. They'd keep adding more and more until I was basically doing everything for them. So I stood my ground. I kept making my own dinners, buying my own groceries, and doing my own thing. And of course, they kept giving me the cold shoulder. Sarah stopped speaking to me unless she absolutely had to, and my dad just looked disappointed every time he saw me. But I wasn't going to let that change my mind. The tension in the house was thick after that. Every time I went into the kitchen to make something, I could feel them watching me, waiting for me to slip up or finally cave and do what they wanted. But I didn't. I kept doing what I needed to do for myself and refused to let them guilt me into anything else. It wasn't easy living like that, but I knew it was better than letting them push me around. At least this way, I had control over my own life. Even if things were a little awkward, I figured that eventually they'd either get over it or find another way to deal with the situation. But one thing was certain, I wasn't going to be their built-in chef or babysitter, no matter how much they tried to guilt me into it. So after all the arguments and tension, you'd think things would settle down, right? But no, of course not. In fact, things somehow got even worse. I was doing my best to stay out of their way, keep my head down, and just take care of myself. I didn't see why it was so hard for them to understand that I wasn't asking for anything from Sarah or my dad. Why couldn't they just leave me alone? Anyway, everything came to a head one day when Sarah decided to take things to the next level. I was in my room doing homework after school, and I could hear my dad and Sarah talking downstairs. I couldn't make out the words, but I could tell they were talking about me. You know when people's voices are quiet, but there's that tense energy behind them? Yeah, it was like that. At first, I didn't think much of it because, honestly, I'd gotten used to them complaining about me. But then, about 20 minutes later, Sarah came upstairs and knocked on my door. I already knew this wasn't going to be good. She walked in without even asking if it was okay and said, "We need to talk." Here we go again, I thought, leaning back in my chair, trying to stay calm. About what she sat down on the edge of my bed and gave me a serious look. "It's about the kids," she started. "I can't keep doing everything by myself. I need help, and your dad agrees." I rolled my eyes internally. We've had this conversation a million times, but apparently she still hadn't gotten the message. "I've told you before, Sarah. I'm not responsible for the kids. You and Dad are." That didn't sit well with her. She looked like she was about to lose it, but managed to hold it together, barely. "I understand they're not your kids, but we all live here together, and as a family, we should help each other out." I couldn't help it, I had to call her out. "Yeah, but it's not really helping each other out if you're just trying to dump everything on me." "I'm not here to make your life easier," I replied. That's when she hit me with the emotional guilt trip again. "Do you really want the kids to go without lunch or dinner because you're refusing to help? What kind of example are you setting for them at this point?" I had to draw the line. "Sarah, I'm not refusing to help with what's actually my responsibility, but feeding your kids is on you. You're their mom. I never agreed to take care of them." She went quiet for a moment, and I thought maybe she had finally gotten it. But then she dropped another bomb. "If you don't want to be part of this family, maybe you should start taking care of yourself completely." I blinked, confused. What does that even mean? She crossed her arms, giving me a look like she was issuing some major ultimatum. "If you're not going to help with the kids, then you don't get to eat the food we buy for the house. You're either part of the family or you're not." I just stared at her, trying to process what she had said. Was she seriously telling me that if I didn't cook for her kids, I couldn't eat anything they bought? This was absurd. I stood up, facing her. "Fine," I said, refusing to back down. I've been paying for my own food anyway, so I'll keep doing that. But don't expect me to take care of your kids just because you don't feel like it." She seemed a little surprised that I wasn't giving in, but she was too angry to show it. "If that's how you want it, fine," she snapped, heading for the door. "But don't come crying to us when things get tough." I rolled my eyes as she left. "Don't worry, I won't from that point on." I basically lived like a roommate in my own home. I bought my own groceries, cooked my own meals, and stayed out of their way as much as possible. It felt strange though, because every time I went into the kitchen to make something, Sarah or my dad would be there, giving me that look, the one where they're just waiting for you to admit you were wrong or mess up somehow. But I wasn't wrong, and I wasn't going to let them push me around. One evening, I came home from work and saw Sarah in the kitchen, but something was off. The kitchen was a total mess, dirty dishes piled up, the counters were a disaster, and it looked like no one had bothered to clean up after dinner. Normally I would have just done my thing and left, but this time I could feel the tension rising. I started making my dinner, quietly ignoring the chaos around me. That's when Sarah came in and leaned against the counter. "It would be nice if you could help clean up," she said, not even looking at me. Without turning around, I replied, "I didn't make the mess, so why should I clean it up?" She sighed loudly, like I was being unreasonable. "Because that's what families do, they help each other out." I turned to face her, setting down my spoon. "No, what families do is take responsibility for their own messes. I didn't make this mess, so I'm not cleaning it up." She glared at me, clearly angry, but didn't say anything. She just stormed out of the kitchen, and I went back to cooking. It seemed like every interaction with her had become some sort of battle, but I wasn't going to cave. I wasn't going to let her guilt me into taking on more than my share. After I finished eating, I cleaned up my own stuff and went back to my room. I knew things were only going to get worse from here, but I didn't care. I was doing what I had to do to survive in this house, and if they didn't like it, that was their problem. The next few days were more of the same awkward silences, cold stares, and passive-aggressive remarks. But honestly, I was used to it by now. I just kept my head down, doing my own thing and staying out of their way as much as possible. I knew I couldn't change how they felt about me, but I could control how I handled it. And as far as I was concerned, I was doing just fine. By the time Monday came around, things were already tense, but I didn't expect what happened next. I had been home for a few hours, minding my own business. I had the house to myself for a while, so I decided to make a proper dinner for once, something decent, not just the usual quick meal I threw together. I was in the kitchen cooking pasta with homemade sauce, maybe some garlic bread on the side. Nothing fancy, but I was feeling good about it. I was halfway through eating when Sarah came home with the kids. I heard them come in, the sound of bags dropping on the floor, the usual chaos, but then it got really quiet. At first, I didn't think much of it and kept eating. But then Sarah walked into the kitchen, and from the look on her face, I knew something was about to happen. She glanced at the food on the table, then at me, clearly not happy. "Did you make enough for the kids?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. I shook my head. "Nope, just made dinner for myself." That was the wrong answer. Her voice rose as she snapped, "You're seriously just going to sit there and eat while my kids are starving?" I looked at her, trying hard not to roll my eyes. "Your kids are not starving, Sarah. They just got home, and no, I didn't make them dinner because you never asked me to." Her frustration was boiling over as she glared at me. "I shouldn't have to ask you. You live in this house, you know they need to eat, but all you care about is yourself. It's disgusting." I set down my fork, ready to argue, but I didn't even get the chance. She was already yelling, throwing all sorts of accusations at me, how I was selfish, how I didn't care about anyone but myself, and how I was tearing the family apart by refusing to help. Her kids were standing in the doorway, watching the whole scene unfold, making everything even more uncomfortable. "Sarah," I said, trying to stay composed, "it's not my responsibility to make sure the kids eat. That's on you and Dad. Don't you dare put this on us," she yelled, her face flushed with anger. "You live here too. You're supposed to help out and be part of this family. But no, you'd rather cook just for yourself like you're some kind of guest in this house." That last comment really got to me. Guest? I'm not a guest. I've lived here my entire life. You and your kids are the ones who moved in, not me. I'm already taking care of myself, paying for my own groceries, cooking my own meals. I'm not responsible for your kids. She completely lost it at that point. You think you're so grown up because you make your own food and pay for some groceries? You don't even know what real responsibility is. Try raising 3 kids on your own, then talk to me about responsibility. I stood up, refusing to be yelled at any longer. That's not my problem, Sarah. You decided to have kids. You and Dad should be taking care of them, not me. I've done more than enough by staying out of your way and handling my own things. I'm not going to become your live-in babysitter and cook just because you're overwhelmed. She didn't like that answer at all. She started hurling insults, calling me worthless, saying I wasn't part of the family anymore, and even that she hated living with me. It was honestly one of the nastiest arguments we'd ever had, and her kids were standing there, hearing every word. I wasn't about to stoop to her level, so I turned and left the kitchen. I wasn't going to keep fighting. I went to my room, shut the door, and tried to calm down. I could still hear her yelling downstairs, but I did my best to block it out. Eventually, things went quiet, and I figured she'd finally given up. But the next morning, things were even worse. When I came downstairs to grab breakfast before school, Sarah was sitting at the kitchen table, glaring at me. The kids were already eating, but there was this weird tension hanging in the air. I grabbed my stuff and was about to leave when Sarah spoke up. "You're making dinner tonight," she said, her tone cold and demanding. I stopped and looked at her. "No, I'm not." "You're making dinner for the kids tonight," she repeated, completely ignoring what I'd just said. "If you don't expect to eat anything in this house ever again." I almost laughed at how ridiculous that sounded. "Sarah, I already buy my own food. What are you even talking about?" She stood up, her chair scraping across the floor. "I'm serious. If you won't contribute to this family, then you're not part of it. Don't touch any of the food we buy. Don't expect any help from us. You're on your own from now on." I looked at her, realizing she was completely serious. She was really trying to punish me for not doing what she wanted. I shook my head. "Fine. I'll keep buying my own food. I don't need anything from you guys anyway." I left for school without saying anything else, but all day, I couldn't stop thinking about how crazy things had become. It wasn't even about dinner or lunch anymore, it was about control. Sarah wanted me to follow her rules, and when I didn't, she was making my life harder on purpose. But I wasn't going to let her win. That night, I came home with my own groceries, made myself dinner again, and ignored the dirty looks from both Sarah and my dad. I could tell they were waiting for me to cave, to apologize, but I wasn't going to. I had my own responsibilities, my own life, and I wasn't going to let them guilt me into taking on theirs. By that point, the tension in the house was unbearable. After everything with Sarah demanding I make dinner and threatening to cut me off from the family, it felt like I was living with strangers. Nobody talked to me unless they absolutely had to, and even then, it was short, clipped, and always with an attitude. Honestly, I didn't mind it meant less drama, but it all came to a head one Friday night. I had just gotten home from work and, as usual, went straight to the kitchen to make myself something to eat. I had my groceries in hand, and the second I walked in, I knew something was up. Sarah was sitting at the kitchen table with my dad, and they both looked at me as soon as I entered. It felt like they had been waiting for me. I put my groceries down and started unpacking, trying to act normal. Then Sarah stood up and said, "We need to talk." I didn't even turn around. About what? She crossed her arms, and my dad just sat there, looking all serious. "You're not contributing to this family," Sarah began, her voice sharp and angry. "You live here, taking up space, but you're not helping out with anything, and I'm tired of it." I turned to face her. "I've already told you, I take care of myself. I make my own food, buy my own groceries, and stay out of your way. What more do you want?" She took a step closer, clearly not satisfied with my answer. "I want you to start being part of this family. That means helping with the kids, making meals for everyone, and actually contributing." I couldn't help but shake my head. "I've been contributing. I'm not relying on you for anything. If anything, I'm making your lives easier by taking care of myself." But she wasn't having it. "That's not enough," she snapped. "You don't get to just live here and do the bare minimum. We're a family, and families help each other." At that point, my patience was gone. "Sarah, I'm not part of your family. I didn't ask for this. You and Dad decided to get married and bring 3 kids into this house. I didn't. I've done more than enough by staying out of your way. and not causing problems, but I'm not going to take on your responsibilities. My dad finally spoke up, his voice quieter, but still firm. You're part of this family, whether you like it or not, and we expect you to act like it. I looked at him, realizing something they were never going to understand. No matter what I said, no matter how much I tried to explain, they were always going to expect me to do more than I should. It wasn't about fairness or logic, it was about control. I let out a long sigh. You know what? If this is what being part of the family means, then I don't want any part of it. I'll keep doing my own thing, and you can keep doing yours, but I'm not going to let you guilt me into doing more than what's fair. Sarah glared at me, and my dad just shook his head. Fine, Sarah said, her voice icy, but don't expect us to help you with anything anymore. You're on your own. I nodded. I already am. With that, I grabbed my groceries, went back to my room, and shut the door.